I never thought our marriage would be tainted by something so irrational. Ryan and I had always been close, inseparable even, since the moment we met. He was everything I could ever want in a partner, kind, loving, attentive. We built a life together that I cherished deeply, filled with small routines that made every day feel like home. But something changed in him, slowly, subtly, until the air between us became thick with tension. All because of a shadow that existed only in his mind. Started when we moved into the new house. It was a beautiful neighborhood, quiet, with the perfect balance of friendly faces and privacy. Our next-door neighbor, Tom, was around our age, maybe a few years younger and single. He was always friendly, offering to help with little things around the house, like moving heavy furniture or mowing the lawn when Ryan was at work. First, Ryan appreciated it. He would joke about how we had scored the best neighbor ever, but I could sense something shift the day Tom came over while Ryan was working late. I remember that evening so vividly. Tom had knocked on the door, holding a bottle of wine as a housewarming gift. It was a simple gesture, nothing more, nothing less. I invited him in for a glass, thinking it was harmless. We chatted for a bit, talking about his job, my new position at the marketing firm, and how we were settling into the neighborhood. There was no flirtation, no inappropriate conversation, just two neighbors having a drink. But when Ryan came home later that night and saw the half-empty bottle on the counter, I noticed the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Tom stopped by with a housewarming gift, I had explained casually, not realizing that this simple statement would plant the seed of jealousy that would grow into something far more consuming. Ryan nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. I didn't think much of it at the time, brushing it off as exhaustion from his long day at work. Little did I know, this moment would mark the beginning of his suspicions. The next few weeks were relatively normal, but I could sense Ryan becoming more distant. He would ask small, probing questions like, "Did Tom stop by again?" Or, "What did you talk about with him?" His tone was light, but I could feel the undercurrent of something darker, something he wasn't saying outright. Then came the comments about my work. I had recently started a new job at a marketing firm downtown, and it required me to attend more after-hours events and meetings. Ryan never had an issue with my career before, always supportive of my ambitions. But now, when I mentioned staying late for a meeting or grabbing drinks with colleagues, his questions became sharper, more pointed. "Do you really need to stay so late?" he would ask, his voice tight. "Who's going to be there?" At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was just being overprotective. But it didn't stop. He began checking in on me more frequently, calling during my breaks to see what I was doing, who I was with. If I didn't answer immediately, his texts would follow. "Where are you? Why didn't you pick up?" I could feel the walls closing in, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. I loved Ryan deeply, and the thought that he might not trust me was something I couldn't wrap my mind around. We had been through so much together. How could he doubt me now, over something so baseless? One night, after another late work event, I came home to find Ryan sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone with a cold expression. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. "Hey!" I greeted him softly, trying to keep the peace. "You're up late." He didn't look up. "You didn't answer my calls," he said flatly. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion from the day weigh down on me. "I was in a meeting, Ryan. I told you I'd be busy." "A meeting that ran until 10 p.m.? His tone was accusatory now, sharp. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "It was an important client. We went out for drinks afterward to celebrate landing the account." "With who?" he pressed, standing up now, his eyes narrowing. "The team, Ryan," I said, feeling my frustration bubbling up. "Just the usual group." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "And your colleague? Mark, right? The one you've been spending a lot of time with." My stomach twisted at the implication. "What are you getting at?" I asked, crossing my arms defensively. "I'm not blind, Claire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see the way he looks at you, the way you talk about him. You're always mentioning him, and now you're staying late with him at work? Going for drinks with him?" "Ryan, stop," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Mark is just a colleague. We work together. That's it. Just like Tom, right? He shot back. Just another friendly neighbor? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you seriously accusing me of something? I've never given you a reason not to trust me, Ryan. You know that. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a caged animal. I don't know what to think anymore. You're always with these other men, at work, at home. It feels like I'm losing you. His words cut deep, but not for the reasons he thought. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but his suspicions were starting to tear us apart. I wanted to scream, to shake him and make him see that there was nothing going on, that he was imagining it all. But instead, I felt my heart breaking under the weight of his accusations. I'm here, Ryan, I said quietly, my voice shaking. I've always been here. I'm not going anywhere. But in that moment, I wasn't sure if my words would be enough to convince him. The following weeks were unbearable. Every time I mentioned work, Ryan's eyes would darken. Every time I talked about a project or a colleague, he would find a way to turn it into something sinister. It felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to prove my innocence for a crime I hadn't committed. And then one night it all came to a head. I had stayed late at work again, preparing for a major presentation the next day. I texted Ryan to let him know I'd be home by 8, but when I walked through the door at 8:15, he was already waiting for me, his arms crossed, his face set in a hard line. You're late, he said coldly. By 15 minutes, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Traffic was bad. You expect me to believe that? His voice was rising now, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. What do you want from me, Ryan? I asked, throwing my hands up in frustration. I've done nothing but tell you the truth, and you refuse to believe me. What more can I do? He stared at me, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and hurt. I want you to admit it. Admit what? I asked, my voice breaking. That I'm loyal? That I love you? That I've never done anything to betray you? His silence was deafening. He didn't want to hear the truth because the truth was too simple, too easy. He wanted there to be something more, something that would justify his fears. But there was nothing. Tears welled up in my eyes as I stood there, feeling the weight of his unfounded accusations pressing down on me. I had never felt so alone, so misunderstood in my life. Ryan, I whispered, my voice trembling. I can't keep doing this. I love you, but this is tearing us apart. For a moment, I thought I saw something shift in his expression. Regret, maybe even guilt. But it was fleeting, gone as quickly as it had appeared. He turned away from me, his shoulders slumping as if the fight had left him. I just don't want to lose you, he said quietly, almost to himself. I took a step toward him, my heart aching for the man I once knew. The man who had trusted me, who had loved me without question. You're not losing me? I said softly, placing a hand on his arm. But if you keep this up, you will. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of the Ryan I had fallen in love with. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close as he buried his face in my shoulder. I could feel his tears soaking into my shirt, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But deep down, I knew that the damage had already been done. The trust between us was fractured, and it would take more than an apology to fix it. And as much as I wanted to believe that this was the end of his jealousy, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the beginning. The days following Ryan's apology were a mix of awkwardness and tentative hope. He tried, I could see that. He would ask about my day at work without the sharp edge of jealousy in his voice. He would hold me closer at night, as if trying to physically reassure himself that I was still his. But the cracks were still there, faint and barely visible, but present. It felt like we were walking on thin ice, careful not to break through to the freezing waters below. I told myself that it was just a phase. Jealousy happens in relationships, right? People have insecurities, and it takes time to work through them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just insecurity. It was deeper, something more unsettling that had taken root in Ryan's mind. And no matter how much he tried to bury it, it was still there. One evening, a few weeks after that emotional confrontation, I was sitting at the kitchen table, going through some work emails. Ryan was in the living room watching TV. Things had been relatively peaceful between us since that night, but I could still sense an undercurrent of unease. I kept hoping that with time, the tension would fade, and we'd go back to how we used to be. Just as I was about to close my laptop, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark, my colleague. Mark. Hey Claire. Just wanted to say congrats again on the presentation. You killed it today. I smiled at the message, feeling a sense of pride. I had worked hard on that presentation, and it was nice to be recognized. Without thinking, I typed back a quick response. Me? Thanks, Mark. Couldn't have done it without the team's support. I set my phone down, not giving it another thought. But Ryan, who had been walking past the kitchen, glanced down at my screen just as the message popped up. I saw his face tighten, his eyes narrowing as he read the name on my phone. My heart sank. Here we go again. Mark? Huh? He said, his voice laced with that familiar edge. I looked up at him, trying to keep my tone neutral. Yeah. He was just congratulating me on the presentation today. Ryan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. Funny, he didn't congratulate you at work? Had to text you after hours. I sighed, already feeling the frustration building. Ryan, it's just a message. He's a colleague. You know that. Do I? He shot back, his voice rising. Because it seems like he's pretty comfortable texting you outside of work. How often does this happen? I stood up, trying to keep calm. It's not like that, Ryan. We work together, we're part of the same team. We text sometimes about projects, that's all. He shook his head, his expression hardening. I don't like it. I don't like the way he talks to you or the way you talk about him. It feels off. I stared at him, incredulous. You're making something out of nothing. Again. We've been over this. Maybe I wouldn't have to if you didn't give me reasons to doubt you. He snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. That hurt. I had done everything I could to reassure him, to show him that I was faithful, that there was no reason for his suspicions. But it seemed like no matter what I did, it was never enough. I crossed my arms, feeling the sting of his words. You don't trust me? I said quietly, the realization settling in like a heavy weight on my chest. Ryan looked at me, his expression softening for just a moment. I want to trust you, Claire. I really do. But I can't shake this feeling. This idea that something's going on behind my back. I see the way men look at you, Tom, Mark. And I don't know. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the frustration and the hurt. Ryan, I love you. I've never given you a reason not to trust me. But if you keep doing this, accusing me every time I talk to someone, you're going to push me away. He didn't say anything for a long time, just standing there, staring at the floor. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Claire. Scared of losing you. I wanted to reach out to him, to hold him, but I felt frozen in place. You're not losing me, Ryan. But if you keep going down this path, you're going to lose us. I don't know how much more of this I can take. The silence between us was deafening, and I could feel the distance growing, like a chasm slowly opening between us. I didn't know how to bridge it anymore. I didn't know if we could. Things remained tense between us after that night, but we fell back into a routine, trying to ignore the growing cracks in our relationship. I kept my head down at work, avoiding any unnecessary conversations with Mark, and I did my best to limit interactions with Tom, our neighbor. But despite my efforts, the undercurrent of suspicion still lingered. One afternoon, while Ryan was at work, I was out in the garden, tending to the plants. It was one of the few things that helped me relax these days, a quiet moment where I could escape the constant tension at home. As I was pulling weeds, I heard a familiar voice call out, "Hey, Claire." I looked up to see Tom leaning over the fence, smiling warmly. "How's it going?" I smiled back, grateful for the brief distraction. "Not bad. Just trying to keep these plants alive. He chuckled. Yeah, I've been meaning to ask you what your secret is. My plants never look that good. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands. Honestly, I'm just winging it most of the time. We chatted for a bit, talking about the neighborhood, the weather, small things. It was nice, easy, like talking to an old friend. But as the conversation went on, I couldn't help but feel a pang of anxiety. I knew that if Ryan saw this, if he saw me talking to Tom, even in this innocent context, he would spiral again. As if on cue, I heard the sound of Ryan's car pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately stepped back from the fence, my smile faltering. Tom noticed the change in my demeanor. Everything okay? He asked, his brow furrowing. Yeah, just Ryan's home, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Tom gave me a small, understanding nod. Got it. Well, if you ever need help with the garden or anything else, you know where to find me. I forced a smile, but the anxiety gnawed at me. Thanks, Tom. I'll see you around. As he walked back to his house, Ryan stepped out of the car, his eyes immediately landing on me. I could see the tension in his jaw as he approached. Talking to Tom again, huh? He said, his voice low but sharp. I sighed, feeling the familiar frustration rise. Ryan, we were just talking. That's all. Is that what you do when I'm not here? Chat up the neighbor. I turned to face him, trying to keep my voice steady. You're being ridiculous. We were talking about the garden. Nothing else. Sure, he muttered, brushing past me and heading into the house. I stood there for a moment, staring after him, feeling the weight of his accusations pulling me down. I didn't know how much longer I could take this. Every interaction, every conversation was scrutinized, turned into something it wasn't. As I followed him into the house, I knew deep down that something had to change. But I didn't know how. The tension between us only worsened after that day in the garden. Ryan's jealousy, once hidden beneath light-hearted questions and passive comments, had now become impossible to ignore. He was suspicious of every interaction I had, with Tom, with Mark, even with other coworkers whose names I casually mentioned. It felt like every moment of my life was under a microscope, and I could no longer breathe freely in my own home. It wasn't long before his insecurities started showing at work. He began calling me during meetings, insisting that I answer immediately. If I didn't pick up, there would be an avalanche of texts. Where are you? Who are you with? Why aren't you responding? Every time my phone vibrated on my desk, my stomach knotted, afraid of the latest accusation that awaited me. One Friday afternoon, as I sat in a team meeting, my phone buzzed in my lap. It was Ryan again. I tried to ignore it, focusing on what my boss was saying, but the phone continued to vibrate with message after message. The notifications were relentless, and I could feel my colleagues casting concerned glances in my direction. When the meeting finally ended, I hurried outside and called him back, already dreading the conversation. The phone barely rang once before he picked up. Where were you? Ryan demanded, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. I was in a meeting, I said, keeping my voice steady. I told you I'd be busy today. I don't care, he snapped. You could have at least texted me back. What's so important that you can't respond to your husband? Ryan, this has to stop, I said, feeling my frustration bubbling to the surface. You're calling me constantly, checking up on me like I'm doing something wrong. I'm at work, for God's sake. I can't keep defending myself every time you feel insecure. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he might actually listen. But when he spoke again, his voice was cold. Are you with Mark right now? I felt my heart sink. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not, he replied flatly. You talk about him all the time, Claire. Don't think I haven't noticed. You think I'm just going to sit here and let you flirt with some guy at work? Ryan, I'm not flirting with anyone, I said, my voice rising in exasperation. Mark is just a colleague. That's it. You're making this into something it's not. You're lying, he hissed, the anger in his voice more pronounced than ever. I know you are. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, my chest tightening with the weight of his accusations. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see that none of this was real, that it was all in his head. But I knew that no matter what I said, he wouldn't believe me. "I can't do this anymore, Ryan," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm exhausted. You don't trust me, and it's killing us." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and when Ryan finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "So what? You're giving up on us?" "I'm not giving up," I said, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. "But you are. You're letting this jealousy destroy everything we've built together. And if you can't let it go, I don't know how we're going to survive this." Ryan didn't respond, and after a long pause, I heard the line go dead. He had hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone, feeling a numbness settle over me. I didn't know what else to say, what else to do. I had tried everything. Talking, reassuring, defending myself, and nothing had worked. Ryan was convinced that I was unfaithful, and no amount of reasoning or love could pull him out of that darkness. That night, I came home to find Ryan sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I knew this was it. We couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give. I walked into the room and sat down on the couch across from him. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive, until finally, I spoke. "Ryan," I began softly, "we need to talk." He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the TV screen. "I don't want to fight." "I don't either," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But we can't keep pretending like everything's okay. You don't trust me, and it's tearing us apart." Ryan sighed, finally turning to face me. I can't help it, Claire. I see you with other men. I hear you talk about them, and I can't stop thinking that." "That what?" I pressed, my voice breaking. "That I'm cheating on you? That I've been lying to you this whole time? Is that really what you think?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I don't know. Maybe. It feels like I'm losing you." I shook my head, feeling the tears that had been building all day finally spill over. "You're not losing me, Ryan. You never were. But if you keep pushing me away, if you keep accusing me of things I haven't done, you will lose me. And I don't want that." Ryan stared at me, his expression unreadable. I could see the internal battle he was fighting, the jealousy, the insecurity, the fear. It was all consuming him, twisting his thoughts and making him doubt everything about our relationship. "I love you," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "But I can't live like this. I can't keep defending myself for something I haven't done. It's exhausting, and it's breaking me." Ryan's face softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with. The man who had been my partner, my rock. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the same guarded expression he'd been wearing for months. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I stood up, my heart aching. "I know you are, but sorry isn't enough anymore. You have to trust me, Ryan. If you can't..." I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of ending our marriage, of walking away from everything we had built together, was too painful to bear. But I knew that if things didn't change, if Ryan couldn't let go of his suspicions, I would have no choice. "I don't want to lose you," he said, standing up and crossing the room to take my hands in his. I don't know how to stop feeling like this." I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I had once known, the man who had trusted me completely. "You have to try," I whispered, "because if you don't, we're not going to make it." Ryan's grip on my hands tightened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He nodded, pulling me into his arms. "I'll try," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll try." I held him close, hoping against hope that he meant it, that this time he would follow through. But even as I stood there in his arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done. The trust between us had been shattered, and I didn't know if we could ever truly put the pieces back together. For a while, things seemed to improve. Ryan made an effort to curb his jealousy, to stop questioning me about every interaction I had with Tom or Mark. He was more affectionate, more present, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could get past this. But deep down, I knew the cracks were still there, lurking beneath the surface. It all came crashing down one evening, when I received an email from Mark. It was a simple message, thanking me for my hard work on a project and suggesting we grab lunch the following week to discuss an upcoming campaign. I didn't think twice about it. Mark was a colleague, and it was normal for us to meet and discuss work outside of the office. But when Ryan saw the email on my phone later that night, everything unraveled. That evening, as Ryan glanced over at my phone on the kitchen counter, I didn't even notice. I was chopping vegetables, preparing dinner like any other night. The email from Mark was innocuous, sitting in my inbox, waiting for a response I hadn't gotten around to yet. It wasn't until I heard Ryan's sharp intake of breath that I realized something was wrong. "What's this?" His voice was cold, almost detached. I turned, knife still in hand, and saw him holding my phone, his eyes fixed on the screen. For a second, I didn't understand what he was looking at, but then I saw it, the email from Mark. I froze, my heart dropping into my stomach. "Ryan, it's just work," I said quickly, my voice calm but tense. "It's nothing. We should grab lunch next week?" "Really, Claire?" he said, his voice rising with every word. "That's nothing? You didn't think to mention this to me?" I sighed, putting the knife down and wiping my hands on a towel. "I didn't mention it because it's not a big deal. It's a work lunch. We've done it 100 times. 100 times? Ryan repeated, his voice dripping with bitterness. "How many times have you had these innocent lunches with him, huh? How many times have you sat across from him, laughing, smiling, and not told me about it?" I could feel the familiar frustration rising, but this time, there was something different, something darker. Ryan wasn't just angry. He was on the edge, teetering between jealousy and something far more destructive. "Ryan, please stop," I said, my voice pleading. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Mark is just a colleague. That's it. We're meeting to discuss a project." "I don't believe you," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I've seen the way he looks at you, and now you're going on secret lunch dates with him." I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of his accusations, the constant questioning, the never-ending jealousy. It was suffocating. I had tried everything to reassure him, to make him understand that there was nothing going on, but it was like talking to a wall. Nothing I said would ever be enough. "I'm not doing this," I said, my voice breaking as I turned away from him. "I'm not going to stand here and defend myself again for something that isn't happening." "Claire," he called after me, but I was already walking out of the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed air. I needed to get away from him, from the house, from everything. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the front door, not caring where I was going or what I would do. I just needed to escape. As I opened the door, Ryan's voice rang out behind me, sharp and cold. "Where are you going?" "To see him." I stopped in my tracks, my hand gripping the doorknob so tightly I thought it might break. Slowly, I turned to face him, my eyes blazing with anger and hurt. "You know what, Ryan? If you keep accusing me of something I haven't done, maybe I should." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, fueled by months of frustration, pain, and exhaustion. The second I said it, I regretted it, but it was too late. I saw the hurt flash across his face, followed quickly by something darker. Rage, betrayal. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice trembling, but there was something dangerous in his tone. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I turned back to the door, stepping out into the cool night air, and closed it behind me. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. What had I just done? I walked down the street aimlessly, trying to calm myself, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I knew I shouldn't have said that, but I was at my breaking point. Ryan had pushed me so far, questioned my loyalty so many times, that I didn't know how to deal with it anymore. But now I was scared. scared of what I had set in motion. Would he really believe that I would cheat on him? Was this the final straw? I didn't know where I was going, but somehow, I ended up at Tom's house. The lights were on, and I could see him through the window, sitting at his kitchen table, sipping a beer. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should knock, but before I could second-guess myself, Tom saw me standing on his porch. He got up, opened the door, and frowned when he saw my face. "Claire? Are you okay?" I tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. I just needed some air." Tom stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. "Of course. You want to talk?" I walked inside, grateful for the warmth and the distraction from the chaos at home. I sat down at his kitchen table, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to ease, if only slightly. Tom set a bottle of water in front of me and sat across from me, his eyes filled with concern. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, unsure of where to start. "It's Ryan," I said quietly, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. "He's been jealous for a long time now. It's like he doesn't trust me anymore." Tom nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I've noticed he's been a little tense lately." "That's putting it lightly," I said, letting out a hollow laugh. "He thinks I'm cheating on him. With you. With Mark, my coworker. With anyone I talk to, really?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "Me? I mean, I'm flattered. But come on." I managed a small smile. "Yeah, I know. But he's convinced there's something going on behind his back, even though I've told him a million times that there isn't." Tom was quiet for a moment, taking a sip of his beer before speaking again. "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard. Of course I loved Ryan. But the weight of everything that had happened between us lately made me hesitate, just for a second. "Yes," I said finally, my voice soft. "I do. But I don't know if he trusts me anymore. And without trust, what do we have?" Tom sighed, setting his beer down. "Trust is everything in a relationship. Without it, things can fall apart pretty fast." I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes again. "I just don't know what to do anymore. I've tried everything to make him see that there's nothing going on, but it's like he's convinced himself that I'm lying. And tonight I said something I shouldn't have." "What did you say?" Tom asked gently. I bit my lip, ashamed of the words that had slipped out. "I told him that if he kept accusing me, maybe I should cheat." Tom winced, letting out a low whistle. "Ouch. I didn't mean it," I said quickly, wiping at my eyes. I was just so angry, so tired of defending myself. But now I don't know what's going to happen. Tom reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. "Listen, Claire, I don't know what's going on in Ryan's head, but I do know that if you guys are going to fix this, you need to sit down and have an honest conversation. No more accusations, no more defensiveness. Just talk." I nodded, squeezing his hand gratefully. "Thank you, Tom. I know this is awkward, but I appreciate it." "Hey, it's what neighbors are for," he said with a wink, trying to lighten the mood. I smiled weakly, but my mind was already spinning with thoughts of what I needed to do next. I couldn't keep running away from Ryan. If we were going to have any chance of saving our marriage, we needed to confront this head-on. And I needed to be honest with myself about how much more I could take. By the time I got back home, the house was dark, and Ryan was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. He didn't look up when I walked in, but I could see the tension in his body, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. I sat down next to him, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. I wasn't sure how to start, but I knew I had to try. "I went to Tom's," I said quietly, my voice breaking the stillness. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "We talked. That's all," I continued, keeping my tone calm. I needed to clear my head, and he listened. For a moment, I thought Ryan might lash out, accuse me again, but instead, he just shook his head, his voice strained. "I don't know how to stop this, Claire. I want to trust you, but every time I see you with him or anyone else, it's like this doubt creeps in, and I can't shake it." I felt a lump form in my throat, my heart breaking for him. For us. Ryan, I can't keep living like this. I love you, but I can't spend my life constantly defending myself against something that isn't real. You have to trust me, or we're not going to make it. His eyes finally met mine, filled with a mixture of guilt, pain, and desperation. I know you're right, but how do I fix this? How do we fix this? Ryan's question hung in the air, fragile and desperate. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, and I knew that his insecurity wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. His jealousy had become a third entity in our marriage, something that lived between us, feeding on every look, every interaction, every word left unsaid. I don't know, I said softly, my voice breaking, but we have to try, because if we don't, this is going to destroy us. Ryan exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands over his face. I don't want to lose you, Claire. I don't know why I can't let this go. It's like I've convinced myself that any minute now, you're going to leave me. I looked at him, my heart aching. He was scared, I could see that. Scared of losing me, scared of being abandoned. But what he didn't understand was that his behavior, his constant need for reassurance, his relentless accusations was what was pushing me away. Ryan, I said, reaching out to take his hand. I'm not going anywhere. But if we don't figure this out, if we don't deal with this jealousy, it's going to tear us apart. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant, as if he were somewhere else. I don't know how to deal with it, he admitted, his voice raw. It's like, I see you with other men, even just talking, and I feel this knot in my stomach. I can't breathe. I start thinking about all the things you might be hiding, all the things I don't know. I squeezed his hand gently, trying to ground him, to pull him back to me. Ryan, I'm not hiding anything. I've always been honest with you. But your jealousy, it's creating problems that don't exist. He swallowed hard, his gaze finally meeting mine. I know it's all in my head, but I can't stop it. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in my bones. Maybe we need help. Maybe we can't fix this on our own. Ryan stared at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. You mean counseling? Yes, I said, nodding. Couples therapy. We can talk to someone, figure out why you're feeling like this, and how we can work through it. We can't do this alone, Ryan. Not anymore. He hesitated, his pride clearly warring with his desperation to save what was left of our relationship. I held my breath, hoping that he would be willing to take this step. It was the only way forward, the only way to save what we had. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. Okay, I'll do it. I'll go to therapy. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. Therapy wouldn't be a magic fix, but it was a start. It was a step toward rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by his doubts. A few days later, we had our first therapy session. I was nervous, unsure of what to expect, but also hopeful. Ryan, on the other hand, was tense, sitting stiffly in the waiting room as we filled out paperwork. He didn't speak much, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. This was hard for him, I knew that, but it was necessary. The therapist, Dr. Miller, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. She welcomed us into her office and began by asking us to talk about what had brought us there. Ryan was quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor, so I spoke first. We've been struggling with trust issues, I said, glancing at Ryan before continuing. Ryan, he's been feeling insecure, and it's been causing a lot of problems between us. Dr. Miller nodded, her expression understanding. Can you tell me more about what you mean by insecure? Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat but didn't speak, so I continued. He's been jealous. He thinks I'm having an affair, but I'm not. I've never given him a reason to doubt me, but he keeps accusing me of being unfaithful. Dr. Miller turned her attention to Ryan. Is that true, Ryan? Do you feel like Claire is being unfaithful? Ryan hesitated, his eyes flicking up to meet mine for a brief moment before dropping back to the floor. I don't know, he said quietly. I don't think she is, but I can't stop thinking about it. Every time she talks to another guy, I get this feeling in my gut, like she's hiding something from me. Dr. Miller leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and soothing. What do you think that feeling is trying to tell you, Ryan? What are you afraid of? Ryan didn't answer at first. His jaw clenched tightly as he struggled to find the words. I'm afraid of losing her, he admitted finally, his voice barely audible. I'm afraid she'll realize she can do better than me, and she'll leave. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't just about jealousy. It was about his fear of not being good enough, of losing me to someone who, in his mind, was better than him. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Ryan, I'm not going to leave you. I love you, but we can't keep going like this. Your fear is making you push me away, and if we don't deal with it, we're going to lose each other. Dr. Miller nodded, her gaze focused on Ryan. It sounds like you're dealing with a lot of fear, Ryan. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough. Those are powerful emotions, and they can really affect the way we see things. But we can work through this if you're willing to try. Ryan nodded slowly, his grip on my hand tightening. I am. I'll try. The therapy sessions became a regular part of our routine. Week after week, we sat in Dr. Miller's office, talking through our issues, trying to untangle the web of jealousy and insecurity that had wrapped itself around our marriage. It wasn't easy. Ryan had been carrying these fears for a long time, and it took time to unravel them. Dr. Miller helped him see that his jealousy wasn't about me, it was about him. His fear of losing me, of not being good enough, had manifested as suspicion and doubt. But as he began to understand where those feelings were coming from, he started to change. Slowly but surely, he stopped questioning every interaction I had with other men. He stopped accusing me of cheating. It was like a weight had been lifted from both of us, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were finally on the right track. But progress wasn't linear. There were still setbacks. Moments when Ryan would revert to his old ways, when a casual conversation with a male coworker or a friendly wave to Tom would trigger his jealousy again. But each time we worked through it. We talked, we went to therapy, and we reminded each other of what we were fighting for. One night, after a particularly difficult week, Ryan sat down next to me on the couch and took my hand. I know I've been difficult, he said quietly. But I'm trying, Claire. I really am. I looked at him, my heart swelling with a mixture of love and hope. I know you are, and I'm proud of you for that. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. I'm proud of us. We've come a long way. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. We still have a long way to go, but we're getting there. Together. It wasn't until one evening, after a long day at work, that I realized just how far we had come. I was at home, sitting on the couch, scrolling through emails, when a message from Mark popped up. He was congratulating me on a recent project, suggesting we grab lunch sometime to discuss the next steps. I felt a flicker of anxiety. Not because of the message, it was purely professional, but because I knew how Ryan might react. Even though things had improved between us, his jealousy was still a sensitive topic. I took a deep breath and showed him the message. Hey, Mark sent me an email about grabbing lunch next week. Just for work. Ryan glanced at the screen, then back at me. For a moment, I saw the old flicker of doubt in his eyes, but then he nodded. Okay, that was it. No questions, no accusations. Just, okay. Couldn't believe it. Really? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Ryan smiled, leaning over to kiss my forehead. Really? I trust you, Claire. Those words hit me harder than anything else had in months. It was the first time in so long that I had heard him say it, and mean it. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had truly turned a corner. The road ahead was still uncertain, but we were on it together, and that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful we'd had in a long time. Ryan's therapy sessions continued, and though we still had moments of tension, they were fewer and farther between. He had learned to recognize when his jealousy was starting to surface, and instead of lashing out or accusing me, he would talk about it. It wasn't easy for him. I knew that. But the effort he was making, the work he was putting in to rebuild our trust, meant everything to me. It showed me that he was willing to fight for us, and that made all the difference. One Saturday morning, we were sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the world go by. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Ryan reached over, taking my hand in his, and I looked at him, smiling softly. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "I think we're going to be okay." I nodded, squeezing his hand. "I think so too." In the months that followed, things between Ryan and me continued to improve. Our therapy sessions with Dr. Miller became a safe space where we could talk openly, where Ryan's fears were acknowledged but not allowed to take control. The tension that had once suffocated our home was slowly dissipating, and in its place was a fragile peace. A tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But I knew all too well that trust was fragile. Even the smallest crack could splinter, sending everything crashing down. As much as I wanted to believe we were past the worst of it, there was always a part of me that braced for the next blow. It wasn't until one evening, after a long week at work, that I felt that familiar tension return. I had just finished a late meeting and was packing up my things when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. "Mark, hey, I know it's late, but you up for a drink? We could celebrate the new contract." I hesitated, staring at the message. I hadn't seen Mark outside of work in weeks, not since Ryan's accusations had started to calm down. We had been keeping things strictly professional, but now, seeing this message, I felt a pang of anxiety. Ryan had been doing so well, trusting me again, but would this be a setback? Would he see this as another reason to doubt me? I decided not to overthink it. Mark was a colleague, a friend, and there was no harm in grabbing a drink to celebrate. I texted Ryan to let him know where I'd be. Hey, just finished work. Going to grab a quick drink with Mark to celebrate the contract. I'll be home soon." I waited a moment, watching the delivered status on my phone. Ryan's response came almost immediately. "Ryan, okay. Thanks for letting me know. Have fun." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. His response was calm, understanding, exactly what I had hoped for. Maybe things really had changed. I met Mark at a small bar near the office, one of those dimly lit places with cozy booths and soft music playing in the background. We found a quiet corner and ordered drinks, chatting easily about work and the success of the latest project. Mark had always been easy to talk to. He was funny, charming in a laid-back kind of way, and we had a good working relationship. But as the evening wore on and the drinks flowed, I couldn't help but notice a shift in the atmosphere between us. Mark's jokes became more personal, his compliments more frequent. "You're really something, Claire," he said at one point, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "I don't think this company would survive without you." I laughed it off, not wanting to make too much of it. "It's a team effort, Mark. You know that." "Sure," he said, his eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. "But not everyone on the team is as impressive as you." There was something in the way he said it that made my stomach twist. I glanced down at my drink, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. This was exactly the kind of thing Ryan had been afraid of, this subtle flirtation that had no place in a professional setting. I knew I needed to set a boundary, to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. "But let's not give me too much credit. We all worked hard on this." Mark shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "Just calling it like I see it." The conversation shifted after that, but the unease remained. I finished my drink quickly, eager to wrap up the evening and get home. When Mark suggested ordering another round, I declined, making an excuse about needing to get up early the next day. We left the bar, and as we walked out into the cool night air, Mark turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for the drink, Claire. We should do this more often." I forced a smile, already feeling the tension building in my chest. "Yeah, maybe. See you at work." I walked away, my mind racing. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I knew how easily Ryan's fears could be triggered. The last thing I wanted was for this innocent drink to be twisted into something it wasn't. When I got home, Ryan was sitting on the couch watching TV. He looked up when I walked in, giving me a tired smile. "Hey, how was your night?" I shrugged, trying to keep my voice casual. "It was fine. Just a quick drink." Ryan nodded, his gaze flicking back to the TV. "Good. I'm glad you went." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This was different. This was progress. A few months ago, a night like this would have ended in accusations, in a tense conversation that would last until the early hours of the morning. But now Ryan seemed okay. He trusted me. But even as I sat down beside him, leaning into the comfort of his presence, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that this peace was temporary. It was fragile, just like the trust we had been working so hard to rebuild. Things were quiet for the next few days. Ryan didn't bring up my night out with Mark, and I didn't volunteer any details. We settled back into our routine, work, therapy, quiet evenings together. But the tension I had felt that night at the bar lingered, a low hum in the background of my mind that I couldn't shake. A week later, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Mark, asking if I had time to meet for lunch to discuss an upcoming project. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar anxiety creeping back in. I hadn't told Ryan about the subtle flirtation from the other night, and now I wasn't sure how to handle this. I decided to play it safe and text Ryan, letting him know about the lunch plan. "Hey, heading out for lunch with Mark. Just wanted to give you a heads up." I waited for his response, my heart pounding in my chest. When his reply finally came, it was simple and straightforward. "Ryan, okay. Thanks for telling me. Have a good lunch." I let out a sigh of relief, grateful that he was still in this place of trust. But as I headed out to meet Mark, that small voice in the back of my mind whispered again, reminding me that trust was delicate, that one wrong move could send everything spiraling out of control. Lunch with Mark was uneventful, mostly focused on work. But there were moments, small, subtle moments, where I caught him looking at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. His compliments were too frequent, his jokes just a little too personal. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the unease never fully left. As I returned to the office, I couldn't help but wonder if Mark's intentions were as innocent as I had once thought. And more importantly, I worried about how Ryan would react if he knew what I was feeling. That evening, I decided not to mention lunch to Ryan. There was no point in bringing up something that might only stir his old fears. I convinced myself that Mark's flirtation wasn't serious, that it was just harmless workplace banter. But deep down, I knew I was keeping something from Ryan, and that knowledge gnawed at me. The next few weeks passed without incident, but the distance between me and Ryan began to creep back in. It was subtle at first, less conversation, more silence. I could feel him pulling away again, but I didn't know why. I told myself it was just work stress, that we were both busy, but the truth was harder to face. Maybe the trust we had rebuilt wasn't as solid as I had thought. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, Ryan turned to me, his voice quiet but tense. "Claire, can I ask you something?" I nodded, my heart already sinking. "Of course." He hesitated, his fingers picking at the edge of the couch cushion. "I've been thinking about that night you had drinks with Mark, and the lunches you've had since then." I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. "What about them?" I want to trust you, Claire. I really do. But I keep thinking about how close you two are, how much time you spend together, and I don't want to go back to that place." But his voice trailed off, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was trying so hard to stay in control, to keep the jealousy at bay, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface. "I understand," I said softly, reaching for his hand, "and I appreciate how hard you're trying. But there's nothing going on between me and Mark. He's just a colleague." Ryan nodded, but his grip on my hand tightened. "I believe you. I do. But I just need to know. Has he ever tried anything?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to ask that, and for a moment I wasn't sure how to respond. Should I tell him the truth about Mark's subtle flirtations? Or should I protect him from the details, knowing that it could reignite his jealousy? I hesitated for just a second too long, and Ryan's face fell. Hasn't he? No, I said quickly, shaking my head. It's not like that. He's never tried anything. He's just maybe a little flirty sometimes, but it's harmless. I've never encouraged it. Ryan pulled his hand away, standing up abruptly. I knew it, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I knew there was something off about him. Ryan, please, I said, standing up to face him. It's nothing, I swear. I've never crossed any lines, and I never will. I love you. He paced the room, his expression dark and conflicted. I want to believe that, Claire, but I can't help thinking, what if? What if what? I asked, my voice breaking. What if I'm not lying? What if I'm telling the truth, and you're letting your jealousy destroy us again? Ryan stopped, his eyes locking onto mine. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice raw with emotion. But I can't shake this feeling. This fear that one day you'll realize you want something else. Someone else. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't want someone else. I want you, but you have to trust me, Ryan. Without trust, we have nothing. For a long moment, we stood there, the weight of our past hanging between us. I could see the battle going on inside him, the struggle between the jealousy that had plagued our marriage and the love that had kept us together. Finally, Ryan nodded, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. I'll try, he said quietly. I'll keep trying. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tightly, hoping that this time we could find a way to move forward. But deep down, I knew that trust, once broken, was never easy to rebuild. It would take time, patience, and a willingness to believe in each other again. As the months passed, Ryan and I continued to work on our relationship. Therapy helped, as did the small, everyday moments where we chose to trust each other instead of giving in to fear. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Ryan's old jealousy would flare up, but we were learning how to navigate them together. Mark eventually transferred to another department, and while I was relieved to have that tension removed from my work life, I knew that our problems had never been about Mark or Tom or anyone else. They had always been about us, about Ryan's fears and my need for him to trust me. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ryan turned to me with a soft smile. You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through, he said, his voice thoughtful. And I realize now that it wasn't just about jealousy. It was about me not believing I was enough for you. I looked at him, my heart swelling with love. You've always been enough, Ryan. Always. He nodded, taking my hand in his. I know that now, and I'm going to keep working on trusting that. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. The road ahead was still long, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally on solid ground. Together, we watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, a reminder that, no matter how difficult the journey, we had chosen each other, and that choice, above all else, was what would carry us forward.